morning. Please be seated. But I trust in you, O Lord. My times are in your hands. Have you ever felt so completely overwhelmed that you wonder where on earth God is and you don't know where to turn? If so, Psalm 31 may speak to you today. The psalmist begins by appealing to God to be a rock of refuge for him, a strong fortress to save him. He remembers that God indeed is his rock and fortress, his refuge in whom he finds shelter, hope, and strength. However, even though the writer has faith in God, he is over his head in a crisis mode. God may be his rock, but that doesn't mean that everything is going peachy. The psalmist cries out for mercy and help in his distress and trouble. He's exhausted from constant sorrow, which is damaging both his body and his soul. This is no short-term problem with an easy fix. Rather, this is a long-term crisis that has exhausted the psalmist's strength. His life wastes away from grief. His bones also are consumed. What a terrible thing it is that when we most need our bodies to be strong to help us cope with the strains and sorrows of life, that is often when they fail us and we fall sick, adding insult to injury. And the psalmist's suffering is not just physical, but it's also mental and emotional. He's surrounded by enemies who despise him and plot to kill him. Indeed, there is terror on every side. Today, we remember the many victims of Islamic extremist terrorists in so many countries, but especially the families of those killed or kidnapped in Libya, Nigeria, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Truly, these people know what the psalmist is talking about. His anguish is intensified because people avoid him instead of reaching out to help him in his misery. Those that don't flee gossip about him, whispering as he passes by. How painful loneliness and isolation are, especially when we're in the pits and unable to reach out and ask for comfort and support. Instead of people remembering him and making an effort to meet his needs, the psalmist's acquaintances and neighbours deliberately forget about him. It's as if he has already died. And yet, in the midst of this psalm of deep anguish and heartache, the psalmist lifts his eyes to God and affirms his trust in the Lord. But I trust in you, O Lord. My times are in your hands. He recognizes that although his situation is utterly desperate, that somehow God is with him and has control sovereignly of his circumstances. The Hebrew of my times are in your hands actually means I entrust my life to your sovereign disposition, which is a confession of ultimate helplessness, dependence, and trust. The first 3 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous roughly paraphrases that in this way: I can't, God can, I think I'll let him. Our past times, our present suffering, and our future destiny are all in the hands of the one who knows the end from the beginning. All hell may be breaking loose. We don't understand what on earth is going on, what on earth God seems to be playing at. And yet ultimately our times are in God's hands. We are his beloved children, even when life feels like a cruel and bitter joke. God does care about us, however unnoticed and unloved we may feel. The psalmist prays to God for deliverance from his persecutors, for those lying lips to be silenced. And then he affirms God's abundant goodness, remembering how God shelters those who take refuge in him. So much suffering has provoked in him a crisis of faith. He feels like God is 1,000,000 miles away. But finally, God answers. Having witnessed God's response to his tears and prayers, the psalmist exhorts the people of God to love the Lord, to be strong, and let your heart take courage as you wait on the Lord. Maybe you are feeling broken today. Perhaps your physical health has been failing. Maybe your mental health isn't doing so well. Perhaps a family member is having a tough time and you ache to see your beloved experience such anguish. You feel like a wrung-out dishcloth, unable to think straight, your anxiety through the roof. How thankful I am that the Bible doesn't sugarcoat reality, but reflects both the tragedy and the ecstasy of our human condition. Today on Palm Sunday, we begin with such joy, waving our palm branches, acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah, the King, who at last brings us peace and salvation from those Roman oppressors. And yet so soon that joy evaporates. The expected victory doesn't pan out. Christ's real agony and death on the tree of Calvary ends all hope. And what a terrible way to go. Deuteronomy 21:23 states that everyone who dies on a tree is cursed by God. How did things go so horribly wrong so quickly when those vast multitudes had been praising Jesus for all the amazing things he had done? Well, how then can we who love God and follow Jesus take heart in the midst of our very own real crises? Thankfully, our strength is not in ourselves. Often we feel more like broken pots, weak, helpless, overpowered, and useless. Psalm 31 teaches us that our strength instead is in God, our rock, our fortress, our stronghold, and our refuge, the one who has reached out and chosen you and me in love to be his own. And our God is a God who works through his people in community. God never meant for us to go it alone, to put on a brave smile when inside we feel totally crushed. So if you are in a crisis, please tell your clergy. If you are struggling with faith in God, let someone know. Tell a friend or two and ask for prayer to hold you up until an answer finally comes. Let others give you practical help and be God's presence for you. Go see a doctor or a counselor, but don't go it alone. This week, as we ride on the roller coaster with Jesus in community at St. Mary's, and we begin with the up of Palm Sunday, we go down to the low of the cross on Good Friday, and then back up to the resurrection victory of Easter Day. Let's look out for one another. Let's uphold and encourage one another to take life one day, sometimes 1 hour or 1 minute at a time. To let go and let God. To keep trusting in God in that deep darkness. I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Amen.